Hey everyone, my name is Vijay. I work at Superfluid as the head of product, and I'm here today to talk about product building for protocol and infrastructure teams. So here's me, a few of the different things that I've done during my time or currently doing, but mainly head of product at Superfluid. I think this is a conversation that a lot of us have had either this week or in previous years, and actually months before. Something that I've been doing this week is chatting to other people working on protocol and infrastructure teams. I think this probably resonates with a lot of you, and I like the way Kevin phrased it. Like, what if we just built a Web3 app that came with some utility? I think if you were around early enough in 2016, 2017, it was, what are the killer apps for crypto? What are the killer use cases? And today it is, why are there so many infrastructure projects and so few applications? And I think what we can do is to focus on a few different things to close that gap. So here are the things I'm going to talk about. I think we can identify some of the reasons why there are no apps, talk about a little bit about what it takes to fix it, and then we can also look at what the outcomes might be if we solve some of these problems. So starting at this point, I think this is really well put by Union Square Ventures a couple of years ago, and actually really holds true today. The infrastructure phase is a myth. I think a lot of us kind of come up with this excuse that before you can have a killer app, you really have to nail all the infrastructure, and that's why we're overinvested in infrastructure. But actually, when you look at how these different phases work, how they emerge, and how they continue, you actually see that there are killer use cases that come out, killer apps that drive the ecosystem forward. And it's when the followers kind of step into that space that these new providers have created, that's when the infrastructure actually starts leveling up in practice. So I've kind of added an extra curve here just to kind of point us to the future. I think we've got a lot of infrastructure, and we'll see which are the use cases that help to pull us to that next phase. And I think there are a couple of ways that we can address the challenge which we have in front of us that are Web3 specific. There are a couple of amazing kind of capabilities that we have together that don't necessarily exist in Web 2 and that we can tap into. The first one of those is new business models. I think the early crypto era started with this idea of mining as a distribution mechanism and a fundraising mechanism, and that really kind of powered a lot of early adoption and early kind of product building in crypto. And we've seen a lot of other generations of sort of monetization and fundraising since, like token sales, yield farming, NFT sales. I think there are still a lot of opportunities there for us to figure out what are the kind of funding mechanisms we can do, we can add to build new apps in the space. And beyond that, I think we're all here this week to sort of talk to each other, to discuss, to teach each other, to upskill on these kind of other non-technical, in some cases, fields that are related to kind of building crypto products. And I think we can kind of tap into our openness to collaboration in this space as well, which is another one of our superpowers. And this is a timely issue because most people who've raised funding in one way or another have pretty much 2 years, to figure this out until their runway runs out. That's kind of how the timing works. So it is an extremely present issue. And I think there are 3 kind of categories that I would define that we're not doing as well as we could, and in terms of reframing our focus, we can actually make a lot of difference. And I think just to kind of narrowly define these to start, I think people can be less afraid to actually work their way towards finding out what those killer apps are as infrastructure teams, to delivering them themselves, and even going part way, I think helps a lot. I think building open source is quite narrowly defined as code, but we can actually think about building open source from the research phase and the design phase in a way that helps bring in more people at those layers. And beyond that, I think this openness to collaborate and the ability to collaborate, there are lots of opportunities for us to double down on that in terms of getting more teams working on the same problems that they share between them. So digging into some of the ideas I have that I think, trying to kind of express through my own work and continuing to drive. Building your own scale, finding your own killer use cases is not an easy problem. I think, there is a kind of complexity to that that all of us kind of understand, like a challenge. And looking at that mountain, I think sometimes means we feel very disincentivized to go after it. But I think that even sort of pursuing those killer use cases, getting plugged into the idea of building an application with real end users, real product adoption metrics, can actually help kind of tune teams towards what exactly needs to get built. One example that I love for this is Michelin. I would love actually a hands up, who's sort of familiar with the relationship between the Michelin Guide and the Michelin Tire Company? Okay, I see a few hands. So, I think this is a great example because, one of the things that we do too little of in crypto is focus on growing the pie over sort of zooming into our specific niche. And so, Michelin, a tire company in the 1900s, sort of stepped back from, their core focus, looked at, what is the pie that they're a part of, car owners, and realized that the sort of biggest gap to adoption for them was actually that, people really didn't have an idea what to do once they had a car. So they wrote this guide to basically kind of indicate all of these interesting restaurants, all of the interesting kind of landmarks and stuff people could go to. And by that, grew the pie for the industry as a whole, and therefore, kind of solved this issue for themselves. And I think in some cases, kind of stepping back and thinking about what is the ultimate kind of source of value for the customers is a great way to kind of train your team to think about those set of problems, as well as the kind of core technical problems that we're often used to solving. And I think there are actually some teams in Web3, you can see Superfluo's logo on there as well, who are doing a great job of this, building those applications, end user applications, through which you can kind of track end user adoption, and you can kind of tune your team to solving the problems between actual product building on top of your infrastructure, as well as the kind of underlying infrastructure that you're focused on. So I've got Socket here, who obviously built Bungee Exchange, a great end user app, and Connects Bridge. And actually at Superfluid, we built a vesting product ourselves, which kind of demonstrates some of these values. But one of the things that I think we do at Superfluid Vesting that is interesting is, and a lot of our products, sorry, doubling down, we need to grow the pie, is building open source. And I think open source to a lot of people means having the right licensing on your code. But I think we can go further than that. I don't think it needs to end at the code. There are lots of artifacts that we build along the way, discovering these products, from research, user interviews, Figma designs, the conversations we have, and the kind of the theses we sort of provide, we test and hypothesize about, and exactly the answers we get about them. And I think that, in equipping builders to go from the kind of hackathon phase to the production phase, getting out there real live products in the world, equipping more people than just the developers that we nerd snipe with our great technical contributions is a kind of massively underserved gap. And I think we're doing a great job in an industry of kind of focusing and centering developer experience in our technical products. But imagine what it might be like if we centered the design experience like we do the developer experience. And on that front, I think we basically come to an opportunity to research and collaborate together. So a couple of the logos that I've added in here are for the teams Mutual and OpenUX, collectives who are working on bridging teams through collaborative research, open research public goods for the industry. There are lots of gaps, I think, that we could all recognize in terms of all of these different applications and how they treat design, how they treat common language, icons, and these are problems that we can solve together, and it will help grow the pie. Similarly to how we have a lot of open source projects that people build on, lots of different libraries and open source code, even tutorials. I think it's massively underserved space in terms of building end-to-end products. And I think solving this problem, investing more time in this collaboration, actually brings us closer towards bringing in a more diverse set of builders on top of our protocols, and solving the kind of narrow focus on infrastructure with bringing in personalities who are a lot more attuned to building consumer products. And if I'd encourage you to all sort of walk away with one thing, it would be to get involved with these projects and to find places that you can collaborate instead of compete, and figure out what kind of open resources you can build together with other people in this space, and sort of make public goods for design and public goods for product and research a bigger part of this industry and our conversations. So what happens if we get this right? I think win number one would be that we understand, like intuitively and innately within our teams, exactly how our protocol and infrastructure are used firsthand. There's a very big difference in the amount of information and bandwidth that we get from hackathon projects and people building on top, as we do from internal teams who are trying to use our tools and figuring out exactly, how you sort of build these end-to-end products with a full stack of Web3 technologies. And tuning people into that mindset, I think, helps us build better tools at the low levels, but also helps us to explore that kind of opportunity space for products built on top. Point two is that we kind of round out this builder community. We are very nichely focused on sort of technologists who are drawn in by some of our technical innovations. And even today, I think there are plenty of conversations that are around like design and product and sort of aligning us on better standards that are missing. And I think by kind of succeeding at this collaboration and sort of building more first-party products, we get to a state where we can have a more broad builder community. And finally, I think we grow the pie. Like the pie is not big enough to support the tens, hundreds of infrastructure projects that are built today. And I think we can all recognize that. And it's part of why we're here. But I think together we can actually, build a more robust foundation for us to kind of both survive this bear market and also prime ourselves for a better and more robust growth during the next, shift in general sentiment. And I think by doing that, and yeah, I'd invite you to all kind of reach out if there are areas where we can collaborate together, then I think we succeed. Cool. I think we have time for some questions.
Any question? Hi, yeah, thanks. Yeah, I very much agree with the idea of kind of having this open source mind about kind of like not only code development, but also design, research, product development in general. Can you maybe, I know you shared a few insights already, but can you maybe share very specifically what kind of processes you kind of go through when you go through these kind of different phases? Maybe some highlights from your side that you have already done with users. I don't know, it would be very cool to have some very specific insights.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like almost the framing of your question kind of reminds me of one conversation I've had a lot this week, which is just that I think the culture of kind of research and design, a lot of companies is still a little bit underdeveloped. Like I think a lot of people don't know how to get started. And I think, it is kind of a skill set that is very useful to bring in. I think, there are so many people who have kind of deep training in this. But beyond that, I think there are a lot of public resources about how to get started. And I would love to maybe try and break some of those down on Twitter in a bit more detail. But, like of many things, I think the best place to get started is to put your product in front of people, ask some questions about it. And then basically the documentation phase. I think that's the kind of critical one. And what I'd like to see is more teams who are doing that research to kind of make that documentation more widely available. And I think actually if you get kind of stuck into both those communities I mentioned, OpenUX and Mutual, you'll actually see there's a bunch of resources that they're already kind of starting to collate for teams who want to upskill themselves on kind of the design and research processes.
Thanks.
Cool. Thank you very much. Cheers.